The Black Tower rises from Chicago's western loop like a dark blade cutting through the skyline. 110 stories, 1,450 feet of anodized aluminum and bronze glass, 9 tubes bundled together, stepping back at different heights to create a silhouette recognized worldwide. The Willis Tower, though most who live in Chicago refuse to call it that. For them, it remains what it was christened at birth, the Sears Tower. The building opened in 1973 as the tallest in the world, commissioned by Sears, Roebuck Company, then the largest retailer on earth with 350,000 employees and annual sales approaching $10 billion. The company spent $175 million to build its monument, a sum equal to more than $1 billion today. Sears planned to occupy the lower floors and lease the upper stories until the company's inevitable growth required more space. The growth never came. Within 2 decades, Sears abandoned the tower entirely, fleeing to the suburbs as the retail empire collapsed. The building that was supposed to proclaim eternal dominance became a monument to corporate mortality. The tower outlived the company. The engineering innovation outlived both. This is the story of what happens when a corporation builds forever and discovers that forever ends sooner than anyone expected. Before we continue with this story, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments below. And if you enjoy deep dives into architectural history and the corporate empires behind them, subscribe and hit the notification bell. New videos every week. By 1966, Sears, Roebuck Company faced a problem that success had created. The company's offices sprawled across Chicago in a patchwork of buildings that had accumulated over decades. The original headquarters on Hoffman Avenue, a massive complex built in 1906 for the mail-order catalog business, no longer suited a modern retail corporation. The Hoffman Avenue complex had been state-of-the-art when Julius Rosenwald commissioned it. At 40 acres, the campus included a 3 million square foot merchandise building that was the largest commercial structure in the world when completed. Workers processed catalog orders in a facility designed for efficiency at industrial scale. But by the 1960s, the mail-order business was declining while retail operations expanded. Departments occupied separate buildings across Chicago's west side and downtown. Executives commuted between locations for meetings. Files had to be transported by messenger. Telephone calls replaced conversations that should have happened face-to-face. The inefficiency cost time and money, productivity suffered, coordination became impossible. Sears needed consolidation. The company employed 7,000 people in Chicago who needed to work under one roof. The space requirements were staggering. 3 million square feet minimum. Some estimates reached 4.2 million. That meant 70 stories with 60,000 square feet each, or 60 stories with 70,000 square feet each. Either way, it meant a building taller than anything Chicago had ever seen. Taller than anything in the world, except the World Trade Center towers then under construction in New York. Sears executives considered a suburban campus. Land outside the city cost less. Parking would be easier. The company could build horizontally instead of vertically, creating the large single-story warehouses and processing centers that Sears knew how to operate. The idea was rejected almost immediately. Relocating 7,000 employees to the outskirts would spark mass resignations. Most workers relied on public transportation. Chicago's elevated train system and bus routes converged downtown. A suburban location would be inaccessible to anyone without a car. The company needed to stay in the city, and the city needed Sears to stay. Chicago's mayor, Richard Daley, wanted them downtown. The western edge of the loop sat partly undeveloped, occupied by aging garment district buildings and light manufacturing. A massive Sears headquarters would bring commerce to an area that needed revitalization. Property values would rise. The tax base would expand. The project would signal that Chicago remained a vital center for American business. Daley had already cleared one major obstacle. In 1955, the city revised its zoning ordinance. The old rule limiting building heights was replaced with a formula. Maximum height could equal 16 times the area of the lot for a large enough parcel that effectively removed the ceiling. Developers could build as tall as they wanted. limited only by economics and engineering. Only the Federal Aviation Administration imposed a hard limit: 2,000 feet above sea level, 1,450 feet above the ground. That was as high as anyone could build without disrupting air traffic patterns over O'Hare International Airport. Sears executives knew they wanted to reach that limit. On July 27, 1970, the company announced plans publicly. The building would rise 110 stories. 4.4 million square feet. It would surpass the World Trade Center towers under construction in New York. It would become the tallest building in the world. Gordon M. Metcalf, Sears chairman, explained the logic to reporters with refreshing directness. Quote, zero quote. The decision was not about beauty or architectural innovation. It was about square footage, corporate pride, and making a statement visible from every corner of Chicago. The tallest building in the world would tell customers, competitors, and employees that Sears was not just large but dominant. Not just successful, but invincible. Sears executives knew what they needed. They had no idea how to build it. That required an architect willing to attempt what had never been done before. To understand the tower, you need to understand the company that built it. Sears, Roebuck Company began in 1886 when Richard Warren Sears, a railway station agent in North Redwood, Minnesota, offered to buy the watches at a discount and sell them to other station agents along the rail line. The profit from that first transaction convinced him that selling goods by mail could be more lucrative than working for the railroad. Sears quit his railway job within months and established the R.W. Sears Watch Company. He moved the business to Chicago in 1887, drawn by the city's position as a railroad hub, where goods from across the country converged. An advertisement he placed in a Chicago newspaper brought Alva C. Roebuck into the operation as a watchmaker and repairman. Roebuck handled the technical side while Sears managed sales and marketing. By 1893, the partnership was formalized as Sears, Roebuck Company. The mail-order catalog business expanded beyond watches and jewelry. By the 1890s, the Sears catalog offered everything rural Americans needed, but could not find in local general stores: buggies and bicycles, sewing machines and sporting goods, furniture and farm equipment, clothing for the entire family, musical instruments, guns and ammunition. The catalog became known as the Wish Book, a term of endearment that reflected how families across rural America pored over its pages, dreaming of what they might order. The United States Postal Service made the catalog business viable. Rural free delivery, introduced in 1896, meant that farmers no longer had to travel to town to collect mail. Letter carriers brought the mail directly to farmhouses, no matter how remote. Parcel Post, established in 1913, made it affordable to ship merchandise to those same farms. Before Parcel Post, shipping a package long distance cost more than the contents. After Parcel Post, Sears could ship a coat or a toolbox to Montana or Mississippi for pennies. Sears became the Parcel Post system's largest customer, accounting for a substantial percentage of all packages shipped in the United States. Julius Rosenwald joined the company in 1895 after Alva Roebuck's declining health forced him to sell his share of the business. Rosenwald was a clothing manufacturer from Springfield, Illinois, who had been supplying garments to Sears for the catalog. He bought Roebuck's quarter share and brought business discipline, operational efficiency, and substantial capital. Under Rosenwald's management, sales jumped from $750,000 in 1895 to $50 million by 1907. Rosenwald implemented the policy that would define Sears' reputation for generations. Quote 1, "The promise was revolutionary." Most mail-order companies operated on a take-it-or-leave-it basis. If you ordered something and it arrived damaged or did not fit, you were stuck with it. Rosenwald believed that trust was more valuable than any single sale. If customers knew they could return anything for a full refund, they would order with confidence. They would order again and again. Trust became the company's currency, worth more than any advertising campaign. General Robert E. Wood joined Sears in 1924. Wood had worked for Montgomery Ward, Sears' main competitor, and resigned after the company's conservative leadership rejected his proposal to open retail stores. Wood understood something that most catalog executives missed: the automobile was changing America. In the 19th century, rural families shopped by mail because they lived too far from stores. By the 1920s, cars made it possible for those same families to drive to town. If Sears wanted to capture those customers, it needed physical stores where people could see and touch merchandise before buying. Wood convinced Sears management to take the risk. The first Sears retail store opened in Chicago in 1925. By 1931, retail sales exceeded mail order revenue. The company opened stores faster than any competitor, and Wood positioned them strategically. Instead of building in established commercial districts where rents were high, he identified areas in the path of suburban expansion and built there before the neighborhoods filled in. One California store famously opened on a dairy farm, with cows still grazing in the field that would become the parking lot. Wood's foresight paid off. When suburbs grew around those stores, Sears was already established as the local retailer. By 1954, Sears posted $3 billion in sales, while Montgomery Ward, slower to expand, managed only $1 billion. Sears became more than a retailer. It became a symbol of American prosperity and abundance. In the late 1940s, the Moscow bureau chief for the Associated Press reported that the Sears catalog was the most effective piece of American propaganda in the Soviet Union. Soviet citizens who saw the catalog marveled at the variety of goods available to ordinary Americans. The catalog demonstrated abundance better than any government campaign ever could. The 1960s brought Sears to its absolute peak. By 1967, the company achieved $1 billion in monthly sales for the first time. 350,000 employees worked in stores, warehouses, and offices across the country and in Mexico and Canada. The company owned the Allstate Insurance subsidiary, founded in 1931, which had grown into one of America's largest insurers. Homart Development, established in 1960, built and managed shopping malls anchored by Sears stores. The 1969 net income reached $441 million. Sears was not just the largest retailer in the world. It was one of the largest corporations in the world, period. But competition was emerging. Kmart was expanding aggressively, offering discount prices that undercut Sears. Walmart, founded in 1962, was still small but growing in rural markets that Sears had once dominated through the catalog. By the late 1960s, cracks were forming in the foundation. Sears executives did not see them. The tower would open in 1973 as a monument to dominance. By then, the forces that would topple Sears' retail throne were already in motion. Success breeds ambition. Ambition demands monuments. Sears was about to build the monument that would outlive the empire that commissioned it. Skidmore. Owings Merrill was not the only architecture firm in Chicago, but it was the only one with Fazlur Rahman Khan. SOM had been founded in Chicago in 1936 by Louis Skidmore and Nathaniel Owings. John Merrill joined shortly after. The firm grew into one of the largest architecture practices globally, known for combining classical design principles with modern engineering. By the time Sears approached SOM, the firm had designed airports, corporate headquarters, and civic buildings across the United States. Bruce Graham served as design partner, responsible for the aesthetic vision and spatial planning. Graham believed that great architecture emerged from solving practical problems elegantly. He rejected ornamentation for its own sake. Every design element should serve a structural or functional purpose. If it looked beautiful while doing so, that was a bonus. Khan handled the structural engineering, solving problems that would have stopped most architects from even attempting a project. Fazlur Rahman Khan was born in Dhaka, Bangladesh, then part of British India, on April 3, 1929. He studied civil engineering at Dhaka University, then earned a Fulbright scholarship to study at the University of Illinois. He joined SOM in Chicago in 1955, working on projects that gave him experience with tall buildings and long-span structures. By the time Sears approached the firm in 1969, Khan had already revolutionized skyscraper construction. The John Hancock Center, completed in 1970, used exterior X-bracing visible on the building's facade. The X-braces were not decorative. They were the building's structural system, carrying wind loads and preventing the tower from swaying excessively. The design was both efficient and architectural, turning the structure into the building's most distinctive visual feature. Khan earned the title Father of Tubular Designs for developing structural systems that treated a building's exterior as a load-bearing tube rather than a decorative skin. Traditional tall buildings relied on thick masonry walls at the base or forests of internal columns and beams to support upper floors. The taller the building, the thicker the base walls had to be, consuming valuable floor space. Khan's tubular concept placed closely spaced columns around the building's perimeter. Connected by deep beams, the entire exterior acted like a hollow tube resisting bending and twisting forces. The interior could be column-free and flexible. The John Hancock Center proved the concept worked. The Sears Tower required something different and more ambitious. The building needed to be significantly taller than the Hancock. Wind loads at 1,450 feet would generate stresses that no single tube could handle efficiently. Standard solutions like exterior X-bracing would work structurally, but Sears executives made clear they did not want their headquarters to look like a piece of infrastructure. They wanted elegance, not exposed bracing. Khan developed the bundled tube concept specifically for this project. Imagine 9 square tubes, each 75 feet on a side, clustered in a 3x3 matrix like a tic-tac-toe grid. Each tube would be rigid on its own, constructed with closely spaced exterior columns and deep beams creating a structural frame. Bundled together, the 9 tubes would share wind loads, with tubes on the windward side pushing against tubes on the leeward side. The system would resist bending far more efficiently than any single tube. But the bundled tube offered something beyond structural efficiency. It allowed for setbacks. Different tubes could end at different heights, creating a stepped silhouette. This served multiple purposes. Structurally, it reduced wind loads on the upper portion where forces were most severe. Functionally, it created smaller floor plates on upper levels that would be easier to lease to smaller tenants. Aesthetically, it gave the building a distinctive profile that would be instantly recognizable. Khan and Graham worked out the configuration together. All 9 tubes would rise to the 50th floor. At that point, 2 tubes on opposite corners, the northwest and southeast, would end. The remaining 7 tubes would continue to the 66th floor. Then 2 more tubes on opposite corners, the northeast and southwest, would end. 5 tubes would rise to the 90th floor. At that level, 3 more tubes would end, leaving only the west and center tubes to reach the full 108 floors. Mechanical equipment would extend to 110. A famous story, possibly apocryphal but repeated in numerous accounts, claims that Bruce Graham pulled out a pack of cigarettes during a lunch meeting with Khan. He extracted 9 cigarettes and stood them on end, staggered at different heights, arranging and rearranging them until both men agreed the proportions looked right. Whether or not the story is literally true, it captures the intuitive, experimental nature of the design process. The bundled tube system was extraordinarily efficient. The Sears Tower would require only 145 kilograms of steel per square meter of floor area. Compare that to earlier skyscrapers. The Empire State Building, completed in 1931, required 206 kilograms of steel per square meter. One Chase Manhattan Plaza, finished in 1961, needed 275 kilograms per square meter. Khan's design would save Sears millions in material costs while creating a structure stronger and more resistant to wind than any previous skyscraper. The system would prove influential far beyond the Sears Tower. It became the foundation for modern super-tall building construction worldwide. Decades later, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai would use a modified bundled tube concept to reach heights that seemed impossible in 1970. Khan's innovation opened the door to buildings twice as tall as the Sears Tower, 3 times as tall, and beyond. Khan was 40 years old when design work began. He was at the peak of his creative powers, widely recognized as one of the world's leading structural engineers. He would die of a heart attack in 1982 at age 53, never living to see how completely his innovation transformed skylines on every continent. The Sears Tower would be his masterpiece. The design was finished by early 1970. The city of Chicago approved the plans. The Federal Aviation Administration confirmed that 1,450 feet would not interfere with air traffic approaching O'Hare. Financing was secured. In August of 1970, Excavation began on the site at the corner of Wacker Drive and Adams Street. August 1970. Contractors broke ground on the western edge of the loop. The site occupied an entire city block bounded by Franklin Street to the east, Jackson Boulevard to the south, Wacker Drive to the west, and Adams Street to the north. Before construction could begin, Sears had to acquire the land, a process more complicated than anyone anticipated. The block was occupied by 15 separate buildings owned by 100 different owners. Some buildings housed multiple tenants. Some parcels were divided among heirs who had inherited fractional interests. Some owners had no interest in selling. They operated profitable businesses and saw no reason to move. Sears hired attorneys from the Arnstein law firm to negotiate parcel by parcel. Some owners sold quickly at fair market prices. Others held out, hoping Sears would pay premiums to avoid delays. Eventually, through a combination of negotiation and pressure, Sears purchased all 15 buildings. The company also negotiated with the city of Chicago to permanently close the block of Quincy Street that bisected the site from east to west. Sears paid $2.7 million for the right to close that street, a figure that would equal $22.4 million in today's currency. Closing the street gave Sears an uninterrupted parcel large enough to support the building's massive footprint. Contractors excavated to a depth of 50 feet, removing 180,000 cubic feet of dirt and hauling it away in dump trucks. The excavation exposed layers of fill, clay, and sand deposited over thousands of years. Below that lay Chicago's bedrock, hard limestone, that would support the building's foundation. Workers dug a trench around the site perimeter, 60 feet deep, 20 feet wide, and 216 feet long on each side. They built a slurry wall inside the trench, pouring concrete reinforced with steel bars to prevent the surrounding soil from collapsing inward during excavation. Steel bracing held the slurry wall in place. Then crews brought in drilling rigs and drilled 201 caissons deep into the bedrock. Each caisson was a cylindrical shaft filled with concrete and steel, extending down until it reached solid rock. The caissons would distribute the tower's enormous weight, hundreds of thousands of tons when fully loaded with concrete, steel, mechanical systems, and occupants, across the bedrock foundation. A sewer line that ran beneath Quincy Street had to be rerouted around the construction site. Water mains, gas lines, and electrical conduits all required relocation. The work proceeded through the fall and winter of 1970. The Diesel Construction Company served as general contractor, coordinating the dozens of subcontractors who would work on different building systems. On June 7, 1971, Gordon M. Metcalf, Sears chairman, presided over a ceremony marking the installation of the first ceremonial steel beam. Photographers documented Metcalf and construction workers guiding the beam into place. The ceremony was symbolic. Structural steel installation had actually begun days earlier, but the ceremony allowed Sears to announce publicly that the world's tallest building was officially under construction. 2,000 workers were employed on the project at peak periods. The workforce included steel workers who assembled the frame, concrete workers who poured floors, electricians who installed wiring, plumbers who fitted pipes, and laborers who moved materials and cleaned up. To accelerate construction, a concrete plant was built in the building's basement. Concrete could be mixed on site and pumped to wherever it was needed. Workers could pour 1/3 of a complete floor every day without waiting for concrete trucks to navigate downtown traffic. Temporary kitchens were set up on site to feed the crews. Telephone and loudspeaker systems were installed on every floor so foremen could communicate with workers across the massive construction site. Safety was a constant concern. Men worked at dizzying heights in all weather. Temporary generators supplied up to 14,000 kilowatts of electricity to power tools and equipment. During winter, most of that power was diverted to heating exposed steel beams on the lowest 5 floors. Steel becomes brittle in extreme cold. Heating the beams prevented them from cracking when workers drilled bolt holes or welded connections. The steel frame rose quickly, 8 stories per month on average. The entire steel skeleton was assembled in 15 months. From mid-1971 to late 1972, workers used prefabricated modular sections lifted into place by derricks mounted on the rising structure. As the building neared the 50th floor in early 1972, opposition emerged from an unexpected direction. Residents of neighboring suburbs filed lawsuits seeking to stop construction above the 67th floor. The suits alleged that a building taller than 67 stories would interfere with television signals, causing reception problems for anyone living north of the city. Property values would plummet, the plaintiffs claimed, because no one would want to live in a house where they could not watch television. On March 17, 1972, the Lake County State's attorney filed the first suit on behalf of suburban residents. On March 28, the villages of Skokie, Northbrook, and Deerfield filed a separate suit in Cook County Circuit Court. Sears filed motions to dismiss both cases, arguing that the courts had no authority to stop construction based on speculative claims about television reception. On May 17, 1972, Judge Laverne Dixon, chief of the Lake County Circuit Court, dismissed the suit with a ruling that became famous for its bluntness. I find nothing in the law that gives television viewers the right to perfect reception without interference. They will have to find some other means of ensuring reception, such as taller antennas or cable service. The plaintiffs appealed. The Illinois Supreme Court upheld Judge Dixon's dismissal on June 30th. The plaintiffs appealed again to federal court. The United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit confirmed the lower court decisions on September 8th. The lawsuits were over. Construction continued without further legal challenges. On May 3, 1973, the Sears Tower reached its maximum height, 1,450 feet, 110 stories. The structure consumed 2.5 million cubic feet of concrete. The facade required 28 acres of black anodized aluminum panels and 16,100 bronze-tinted windows. The windows were not purely decorative. They admitted natural light while the bronze tint reduced solar heat gain, lowering cooling costs. The construction cost totaled $175 million, a figure announced publicly and widely reported in the press. For context, that amount would build approximately $1 billion worth of construction in today's economy. The building officially became the tallest in the world, surpassing the roof height of the World Trade Center towers in New York. Would be profitable, whether Sears would be profitable, whether Sears would fill it with employees, whether tenants would lease the upper floors, all of that remained to be seen. The tower was complete. The test was about to begin. The tower opened in 1973. Half of it stood empty. Sears occupied the lower 48 floors, housing the company's merchandise group, which managed procurement, inventory, and distribution for the retail stores. The large floor plates on the lower levels, some exceeding 55,000 square feet, suited Sears' operational needs perfectly. Departments could spread across open spaces without partitions. Executives had room for private offices and conference areas. File rooms could accommodate the massive paper archives that corporations generated before digital records. The design worked for Sears because the building had been designed for Sears. It worked less well for potential tenants on the upper floors. Those floors featured smaller footprints due to the setbacks that created the building's distinctive silhouette. Floor sizes varied. Some were large enough for medium-sized firms. Some were so small they could accommodate only a handful of offices. The irregular shapes created by the bundled tube system meant that some spaces were awkward to subdivide. The building's distinctive architecture created interior spaces that did not conform to standard office layouts. Corporations accustomed to uniform rectangular floors found the Sears Tower difficult to use efficiently. Sears had designed the tower for its own needs and assumed that growth would eventually require all 4.4 million square feet. The growth never materialized. By 1974, just 1 year after opening, Sears executives were already scaling back expansion plans. The retail industry was changing faster than Sears anticipated. Competition from Kmart intensified as the discount chain opened stores aggressively. Walmart, still concentrated in the South and Midwest, was expanding into markets Sears had once dominated. Both competitors offered prices Sears could not match, while maintaining the quality and service standards the company prided itself on. The retail landscape was shifting beneath Sears, and the company struggled to adapt. The tower stood half vacant for nearly a decade. Sears could not lease the upper floors at rates that justified the building's cost. By 1984, 6,500 Sears employees worked in the building, occupying roughly half the available space. The remaining space was occupied by 5,500 employees from about 70 other companies. Law firms leased several floors, drawn by the prestige of the address. Smaller corporations took space where they could get it. Consulting firms, accounting practices, and professional services all found the building acceptable, even if not ideal. Rents were moderate compared to other premium buildings. The address at 233 South Wacker Drive carried prestige. The building was iconic and instantly recognizable, but the vacancy rate remained stubbornly high, far above what Sears had projected when financing the construction. The financial strain became severe. Sears was forced to take out a mortgage on the building, borrowing $850 million secured by the tower itself. Servicing that debt while the building sat partially empty created pressure on the company's balance sheet. The world's tallest building, which was supposed to demonstrate Sears' financial strength, became a symbol of overreach and miscalculation. On June 22, 1974, one bright spot emerged. The Skydeck observation deck opened to the public on the 103rd floor, 1,353 feet above the ground. It became the highest observation deck in the United States, surpassing the observation decks in New York's Empire State Building and World Trade Center. Visitors could see 40 to 50 miles on clear days. The view encompassed 4 states. Illinois spread out to the south and west, Indiana to the southeast, Michigan across Lake Michigan to the northeast, and Wisconsin to the north. On exceptionally clear days with low humidity, visitors claimed that they could see nearly to the Wisconsin Dells. Elevators designed specifically for the Skydeck carried tourists from the ground floor to the 103rd floor in about 60 seconds. The rapid ascent created a noticeable sensation as air pressure changed. Ears popped. Some visitors felt momentarily lightheaded. The experience of shooting upward at high speed, then stepping out onto a platform where Chicago spread below like a map, created an immediate sense of vertigo and wonder. Annual visitation reached 1.5 million within the first few years. Tourists from across the country and around the world added the Skydeck to their Chicago itineraries, alongside the Art Institute, the Museum of Science and Industry, and Lake Michigan beaches. The Skydeck generated revenue and brought attention to the building even as the office floors remained problematically vacant. In 1982, twin antennas were added to the roof, increasing the building's total height to 1,707 feet. The antennas served multiple television and radio stations, which leased space for transmission equipment and paid fees for antenna access. The antennas made the tower even more visible across the Chicago region, a black spike rising above the skyline, topped with red aircraft warning lights that blinked through the night. In February 1984, Sears announced a renovation designed to attract more visitors to the lower floors and activate the ground level, which felt lifeless and unwelcoming. The project was designed by SOM and completed in mid-1985. A 4-story glass dome was installed over the main entrance, creating a bright, airy entry experience that contrasted with the dark, fortress-like exterior. The first 4 stories were converted into a shopping atrium with retail stores, restaurants, and service businesses. A dedicated visitor center for the Skydeck was created, with ticketing exhibits and waiting areas designed to handle the heavy tourist traffic. The renovation received praise from architectural critics who had previously criticized the building's street-level presence. Paul Gapp of the Chicago Tribune wrote that SOM had scaled the new entrance skillfully in keeping with the main building's height, and that the new atrium relieves the formerly cramped feeling from just inside the Franklin entrance. The improvements helped, but they did not solve the fundamental problem of vacant office floors and a building that was costing Sears money instead of making it. The cultural significance of the building grew even as its financial performance disappointed. The Sears Tower appeared in films set in Chicago, from action movies to romantic comedies. Postcards featuring the tower sold in gift shops across the city. Travel guidebooks included the Skydeck as a must-see attraction. Tourists photographed the building from every angle, capturing it at sunrise, sunset, and illuminated at night. Architectural students studied Khan's bundled tube design in universities worldwide. The tower became synonymous with Chicago itself, an icon as recognizable as the city's name, more famous than any building except perhaps New York's Empire State Building. But fame did not pay the bills. The base of the tower remained fortress-like despite the renovations. The plaza around it was windswept and uninviting, a concrete expanse where pedestrians hurried through rather than lingered. Few shops occupied the ground level. The building looked designed to keep people out rather than welcome them in. This was partly intentional. The Western Loop in the early 1970s bordered areas city planners considered economically depressed and potentially dangerous. The tower's design reflected those security concerns, prioritizing controlled access over public engagement. By 1988, the tension between cultural success and financial struggle reached a breaking point. Sears had built the world's tallest building and achieved global recognition. But the company could not fill the building with paying tenants, and the mortgage was a constant drain. Sears announced what many had anticipated for years. The company would sell the tower and relocate its headquarters. The monument to Sears' dominance was about to be abandoned by the company that built it. The tower's vacancy was a symptom. The disease was Sears itself. During the 1980s, the retail industry underwent a transformation that left Sears behind, struggling with a business model built for an earlier era. Kmart surpassed Sears as the largest retailer in the United States in the early 1980s, driven by aggressive expansion and discount pricing that Sears could not match. Walmart surpassed both by the late 1980s. By the early 1990s, Walmart had become the largest retailer globally, a title it retains to this day. Sears' revenue continued to grow in absolute terms, but market share eroded steadily. Sears responded to declining dominance with diversification, a strategy that seemed logical but proved disastrous. The company invested heavily in real estate development through its subsidiary Homart Development, which had been formed in 1960 to build shopping malls anchored by Sears stores. Homart became one of the largest mall developers in the country, constructing and managing properties nationwide. The business was profitable, but it distracted management attention from the core retail operation. Sears expanded into financial services with similar enthusiasm. In 1981, the company acquired Dean Witter Reynolds, a brokerage firm hoping to offer investment services alongside retail merchandise. In 1985, Sears launched the Discover Card, entering the credit card business dominated by Visa and MasterCard. The Discover Card succeeded beyond expectations. Within 4 years, 20 million Americans carried the card, attracted by cashback rewards and no annual fee. Credit operations became a significant source of revenue and profit. But success in financial services created a paradox. Grew stale as buyers failed to anticipate changing consumer tastes. Customer service declined as cost-cutting reduced staff levels. The stores that had once defined American retail began to feel tired and outdated. Competitors offering lower prices and better selection steadily pulled shoppers away. 1991 marked a turning point that could not be ignored. Walmart officially became the nation's largest retailer, surpassing both Sears and Kmart. The shift was seismic. For decades, Sears had been synonymous with American retail success. Now it was being beaten by a company that had started in rural Arkansas, a company that Sears executives had once dismissed as a regional discount operator with no future in major markets. Sears posted a $3.9 billion loss in 1992, the largest loss ever recorded by a North American retailer at that time. The loss shocked Wall Street and made headlines nationwide. How could the company that once dominated American retail lose nearly $4 billion in a single year? The answer lay in years of declining sales, bloated costs, and write-downs of failing operations. The same year brought a public relations disaster. California sued Sears for fraudulently charging customers for unnecessary auto repairs at Sears auto centers. The scandal damaged the company's reputation for trustworthiness, the very foundation Julius Rosenwald had built almost a century earlier. Sears' promise had been, quote, 5, quote. Now the company faced accusations of deliberately cheating customers. The contradiction was devastating. Sears began shedding assets in a desperate attempt to refocus on retail and stop the financial bleeding. The company sold Homart Development to General Growth Properties in 1995. The Allstate Insurance subsidiary, which Sears had owned since 1931, was spun off as an independent company the same year. In 1993, Sears made the most symbolic cut of all. The company discontinued the iconic catalog that had defined Sears since its founding. The catalog had pioneered home shopping in America. It had brought consumer goods to rural families who had no access to stores. It had become a cultural institution, with families keeping old catalogs for years, children circling items they wanted for Christmas, adults using the catalog to research products even if they bought them in stores. The decision to discontinue the catalog eliminated 50,000 jobs. Workers who had processed orders, managed inventory for catalog distribution, and operated the massive warehouses that supported mail order operations were laid off. The company was contracting, not growing. Management became, as one industry observer noted, strategic decisions were made not to win markets, but to stop losses. Executives focused on short-term cost reductions instead of long-term investments in customer experience, store modernization, or competitive positioning. No single executive killed Sears. The company died of what kills most empires: complacency in the face of change. Sears had dominated when Americans shopped in person at department stores anchored in shopping malls, when customers valued quality and service over low prices, when the Sears name meant trustworthiness and reliability. As shopping habits shifted toward discount big-box retailers and later toward online commerce, Sears failed to adapt. The catalog operation that had pioneered home shopping was shut down in 1993, just as the internet began to enable a new form of home shopping that would transform retail. The irony was noted by many observers and critics. Sears had provided the business model that Amazon would later capitalize on. Customers browsing products at home, selecting what they wanted, ordering by mail, having goods delivered to their door. That was the Sears catalog business. But Sears was not nimble enough to make the digital transition. The company focused on brick-and-mortar stores at precisely the moment brick-and-mortar retail was losing ground to e-commerce. A failing retailer struggling with nearly $4 billion in losses could not afford to maintain the world's tallest building. In 1992, Sears began the process of moving out, abandoning the monument the company had built less than 2 decades earlier. 1992. After barely 2 decades in the tower, Sears began evacuating its headquarters. The company had already suffered an early symbolic defection. In 1990, the law firm Keck, Mahan & Kate, a prestigious tenant occupying several floors, decided to move to a development that would become 77 West Wacker Drive, a modern office tower being built nearby. Sears attempted to persuade the firm to stay, offering lease concessions and improvements. The effort failed. Keck, Mahan & Kate moved out. The departure carried symbolic weight. If a prestigious law firm did not want to remain in the world's tallest building, what did that say about the building's future? If even prime tenants were leaving, how could Sears attract new ones to fill the chronically vacant upper floors? Sears' own departure followed 2 years later. The destination was Prairie Stone Business Park in Hoffman Estates, Illinois, a suburb 30 miles northwest of downtown Chicago. The campus sprawled across 273 acres of land that had recently been farmland. It was everything the Sears Tower was not. Low-rise buildings spread horizontally, accessible only by car, surrounded by vast parking lots. Isolated from urban amenities, the village of Hoffman Estates had pursued Sears aggressively, offering an incentive package reportedly valued at $240 million. The package was the largest tax break ever extended to a company in Illinois history. It included property tax abatements stretching over decades, infrastructure improvements funded by the village, and various other benefits designed to lure a major employer to the suburbs and transform Hoffman Estates from a bedroom community into an employment center. Sears accepted the offer. The economics were compelling. The Hoffman Estates campus would cost less to build and operate than maintaining offices in the Sears Tower. Employees could park for free instead of paying for downtown parking or public transportation. The suburban location would theoretically make it easier to recruit employees from the growing northwest suburbs. The move bruised Chicago's civic pride. The city had lifted height restrictions in the 1950s specifically to accommodate tall buildings like the Sears Tower. Mayor Daley had supported Sears' consolidation downtown, seeing it as vital to keeping the Loop vibrant as a commercial center. Now Sears was abandoning the city for a suburban office park, joining a broader corporate exodus that threatened to hollow out downtown Chicago. The evacuation began in 1992 and continued through 1995. Barb Lehman, a Sears executive tasked with managing the relocation, directed the logistics of moving 5,000 employees from downtown Chicago to Hoffman Estates. The process was complex and painful. Employees who had been hired with the understanding that they would work downtown suddenly faced a choice: relocate to the suburbs or find new jobs. Most employees had relied on public transportation to reach the Loop. Chicago's elevated train system and bus routes made downtown accessible from neighborhoods across the city and inner suburbs. The Hoffman Estates campus had no public transportation. Employees needed cars. Commutes that had been 30-minute train rides became hour-long highway drives, often longer during rush hour. The most common question from employees, Lehman recalled years later, was simply, "How will I get there?" Some employees quit rather than make the transition. Others bought cars, often going into debt to afford them, and endured the long commutes. Morale suffered. The move felt like a demotion, a retreat from the prestige of working in the world's tallest building to the anonymity of a suburban office park. In 1994, before the move was complete, Sears sold the tower to AEW Capital Management, a Boston-based real estate investment firm, in partnership with MetLife. The sale involved complex financial restructuring. Sears renegotiated the $850 million mortgage that had been weighing on the company's balance sheet. Under the new agreement, Sears was no longer liable for the loan. The company retained nominal ownership temporarily as part of the deal structure. But AEW and MetLife had effective control of the building and would manage operations. Sears retained naming rights through 2003, ensuring that the building would continue to be called the Sears Tower even after the company abandoned it. By 1995, the last Sears employees vacated the tower entirely. The merchandise group that had occupied the lower 48 floors for 21 years was gone. Desks were emptied. Files were packed into boxes and shipped to Hoffman Estates. The building that was supposed to be a monument to Sears' eternal dominance had served as the company's headquarters for just 2 decades. The monument outlasted the tenure. In 1997, ownership changed hands again. Khan, a Toronto-based real estate firm that managed the CN Tower and other prominent properties, acquired AEW's holdings in the Sears Tower for $110 million. Khan assumed $4 million in liabilities and took over the $734 million mortgage that still encumbered the property. The building's ownership had changed hands twice in 3 years, passing from the company that built it to investors who saw it purely as a real estate asset to be managed for profit. Management during this period was inconsistent. The building required significant investment to modernize systems and attract tenants, but the ownership groups were reluctant to commit capital. Systems that needed upgrades were deferred. Maintenance was performed reactively rather than proactively. The tower generated rental income from existing tenants, but not enough to justify the major capital expenditures that would have made it competitive with newer office buildings. The ownership groups extracted what cash flow they could and waited for market conditions to improve enough to sell at a profit. In 2003, Sears' naming rights expired. The company no longer had any legal claim to the building it had commissioned 30 years earlier. The building was legally nameless, available for renaming by any tenant willing to pay for the privilege. But everyone in Chicago still called it the Sears Tower. The name had outlived the company's presence in the building. The name would outlive the company's ownership. The name would outlive the company itself. Sears was gone. The tower remained. What it needed was a new identity and tenants willing to occupy the world's tallest building in a city that no longer dominated American commerce the way it had when the tower was built. September 11, 2001, the Sears Tower was evacuated after rumors spread that a hijacked plane was headed for Chicago. The rumor was false. No plane was coming to Chicago. But the fear was absolutely real. Employees poured into the stairwells and exits. Security guards locked the entrances behind the last evacuees. The building stood empty for hours while the nation watched New York's World Trade Center towers collapse on television, while smoke rose from the Pentagon, while reports came in of a 4th plane crashing in Pennsylvania. Chicago police received bomb threats targeting the Sears Tower and the John Hancock Center. The threats were not credible, but authorities took no chances. Increased police presence appeared throughout the loop. Officers were ordered to wear uniforms instead of plain clothes to heighten their visibility and reassure a frightened public. The city opened its emergency command center on the west side to coordinate responses and prepare for scenarios that seemed unthinkable before that morning. In the months and years that followed, intelligence reports confirmed what many had suspected from the beginning. The Sears Tower had been on Osama bin Laden's original target list for the September 11th attacks. Chicago was among several cities initially considered for strikes, along with Los Angeles and additional targets in Washington beyond the Pentagon and Capitol. According to captured al-Qaeda operatives questioned by American intelligence agencies, the tower had been discussed specifically as a potential target. One operative was familiar with Chicago and had worked in the city, giving the terrorists knowledge of the tower's significance and symbolic value as the tallest building in the United States. Fortunately, Chicago did not make the final selection. The reasons remain unclear. Some analysts suggested logistical challenges. Others pointed to the difficulty of finding pilots familiar with Chicago airspace. The result was the same. Chicago was spared by chance or circumstance, not by protection or preparedness. In 2010, nearly a decade after the attacks, former President George W. Bush confirmed during a book tour visit to Chicago that the Sears Tower had been a quote of the terrorists. For years, city officials and FBI representatives had publicly downplayed or outright denied reports linking the tower to al-Qaeda's planning. Bush's statement, based on intelligence he had access to as president, ended the debate. The building had been targeted. It had been on the list. It had been spared. The confirmation of the tower's status as a terrorism target devastated leasing efforts and tenant confidence. Major corporations began leaving. Goldman Sachs Group, which had occupied multiple floors, departed for other buildings. Ernst Young vacated its floors. Merrill Lynch left. The financial services firms that had once seen the Sears Tower as a prestigious address now saw it as a liability, a potential target that threatened employee safety and business continuity. Leasing activity plunged nearly 20% in the months following September 11th. The vacancy rate shot above 20%, a dramatic reversal from the pre-September 11th peak occupancy of nearly 98%. Real estate brokers struggled to persuade companies to even tour the building. Prospective tenants would listen to the pitch, hear the address, and decline to visit. The building's fame had become a curse. Security was enhanced substantially and visibly. Reinforced entrances were installed at all public access points. Advanced surveillance and screening systems replaced older equipment. Guards were stationed at checkpoints to inspect bags and verify identification. Concrete barriers were placed around the building's perimeter to prevent vehicle attacks. The message from building management was clear. The Sears Tower was being protected with state-of-the-art security measures, but the visibility of those security measures had an unintended psychological effect. Every checkpoint reminded tenants that the building needed protection. Every barrier reinforced the perception that the building was a target. Every uniformed guard carrying a weapon suggested that an attack was not just possible, but expected. The symbolism worked against leasing efforts instead of supporting them. In 2006, 5 years after September 11th, the FBI arrested 7 men in Florida and charged them with conspiring to blow up the Sears Tower. The group, which became known as the Liberty City Seven, had been infiltrated by FBI informants posing as al-Qaeda representatives. The men discussed plans to destroy the tower, wage war against the United States, and establish an Islamic State. They swore allegiance to Osama bin Laden in ceremonies that were recorded by the FBI. Prosecutors presented 15,000 audio and video recordings as evidence during the trials that followed. The defense argued that the men had no real capability or intention to carry out the attacks. They had played along with the informants' talk of terrorism in hopes of obtaining money for their community organization. They had no weapons. They had no explosives or training in how to use them. They had no actual contact with al-Qaeda or any other terrorist organization. FBI Deputy Director John Pistole publicly described the plot as __9__, acknowledging that the group had neither the means nor realistic plans to attack the tower. Through multiple trials spanning several years, Juries deadlocked repeatedly before eventually convicting all 7 men. The convictions were controversial. Critics argued that the FBI had manufactured a terrorist plot through entrapment, encouraging delusional individuals to make statements that could be prosecuted as conspiracy. Supporters argued that the men had expressed genuine intent to commit terrorism and deserved prosecution, regardless of their lack of capability. By 2009, all 7 men had been convicted and sentenced to prison terms, though the conspiracy was widely regarded as incompetent and unlikely to have succeeded even without FBI intervention. Still, the arrests and trials reinforced the public perception that the Sears Tower remained a target for terrorists, whether foreign or domestic. Recovery from the post-September 11th crisis was slow and painful. By 2011, a decade after the attacks, occupancy had climbed back to 82.8%. That was an improvement, but still far from the pre-attack peak of 98%. Brokers noted a gradual shift in attitudes among prospective tenants. Companies were beginning to see the building as a prominent business address in downtown Chicago rather than primarily as a terrorism target. Time was healing the fear, allowing rational business calculations to override emotional reactions. In 2009, United Airlines announced a decision that signaled a turning point. The airline would move its operations center from Elk Grove Township, a suburb northwest of Chicago, to the Sears Tower. The move would bring 2,000 to 2,800 employees into the building, making United one of the largest tenants and filling a substantial amount of vacant space. Aviation industry experts publicly criticized the decision, questioning why United would locate its operational nerve center, the facility that controlled flight operations across the airline's network, in a building that had been identified as a potential terrorist target. United proceeded anyway. The city of Chicago offered between $25 and $36 million in incentives to secure the deal, including tax breaks and infrastructure improvements. The economics outweighed the security concerns. The arrival of United signaled that corporate America was ready to return to high-rise offices, even controversial ones with complicated histories. One of the nation's largest airlines was willing to occupy the building. The move suggested that the terror fears that had dominated the early 2000s were fading into memory, replaced by more prosaic concerns about rent, location, and amenities. The psychological wound from September 11th was healing. By 2009, the building needed more than recovering tenant confidence. It needed a new name to replace the Sears brand that no longer meant what it once had. And it needed a massive renovation to compete with newer office towers that offered modern systems, efficient layouts, and amenities the aging Sears Tower lacked. 2003. Sears naming rights expired after 9 years of holding those rights despite having no presence in the building. The building was officially nameless for the first time since opening 30 years earlier. In practice, everyone in Chicago still called it the Sears Tower. The name was embedded in the city's identity, woven into the mental map that residents carried. Taxi drivers gave directions using Sears Tower as a landmark. Tour guides pointed it out. Postcards sold in gift shops displayed the name. Changing that name would require a tenant willing to pay substantial money for the privilege and willing to endure the public backlash that would inevitably follow. In 2004, American Landmark Properties, a real estate firm based in Skokie, Illinois, purchased the building in partnership with New York investors Joseph Shetrit and Joseph Moynihan. The purchase price was approximately $840 million, a substantial sum that reflected both the building's iconic status and its struggles with vacancy and deferred maintenance. The new ownership group attempted to modernize operations, upgrade systems, and attract tenants to fill the chronically vacant floors. Performance suffered under their management despite their intentions. Investment in building systems remained minimal. Critical upgrades were deferred to preserve cash flow. Later accounts from brokers and tenants described the ownership as having run the building into the ground, extracting revenue while allowing conditions to deteriorate. Attempts to sell naming rights failed repeatedly during this period. In 2005, the ownership group negotiated with CDW Corporation, a technology company, to purchase naming rights. The deal collapsed over price and terms. In 2008, negotiations with the United States Olympic Committee fell through. The committee wanted to name the building the Olympic Tower as part of Chicago's bid to host the Summer Games, but the ownership group's asking price was too high, and the committee's offer was too low. No agreement could be reached. No company wanted to attach its name to the building at a price the owners found acceptable. The building remained nameless legally, while retaining the Sears Tower name culturally. In 2009, Willis Group Holdings, a London-based insurance brokerage with global operations, leased more than 140,000 square feet of office space on 3 floors of the building. The lease negotiations included naming rights for 15 years as part of the package. A Willis spokesman stated publicly that the naming rights were obtained at no additional cost to the company beyond the standard lease payments. The rights came as a concession from the building's owners, who valued having a name on the building more than they valued the incremental revenue from selling the rights separately. On July 16, 2009, the building was officially renamed the Willis Tower. Signs were changed, marketing materials were updated, press releases were issued. The reaction from Chicago residents was swift, hostile, and sustained. Willis Group Holdings occupied only 3.6% of the building's total space. A British insurance company that most Chicagoans had never heard of was renaming one of the city's most iconic structures, a building that had defined the Chicago skyline for 36 years. The Chicago Tribune published an article that captured the public mood. The newspaper joked that the new name reminded readers of the catchphrase, "What you talkin' about, Willis?" from the 1980s television sitcom Different Strokes, in which a young child character named Arnold repeatedly said the line to his older brother Willis. The paper questioned whether the name change was ill-advised and _quote, _12 _. The reference to Marshall Field's was pointed. That department store, a Chicago institution since 1852, had been acquired by Macy's in 2005 and rebranded. Chicago residents had protested vigorously and unsuccessfully. The wound was still fresh. A grassroots campaign called Quote 13 launched within days of the renaming announcement. Organizers collected more than 50,000 signatures on petitions demanding that the building retain its original name. The petitions were submitted to city officials, though everyone involved knew that city government had no authority over private property naming rights. Social media filled with complaints, jokes, and expressions of outrage. Local news stations covered the controversy extensively, interviewing residents who declared they would never call it Willis Tower. The effort had no legal standing. Naming rights belonged to the building's owners, not to the public or city government. But the campaign demonstrated the depth of civic attachment to the Sears Tower name. For Chicagoans, the building was not just a commercial property. It was part of the city's identity, a symbol as important as the Chicago Bulls or deep dish pizza or Lake Michigan. The renaming felt like theft, like an outsider taking something that belonged to everyone. The controversy symbolized a broader tension between corporate interests and civic identity. Corporations viewed buildings as assets to be leveraged for maximum revenue. Naming rights were commodities to be sold to the highest bidder. Cities viewed landmarks as cultural property that belonged to everyone who lived there, worked there, or identified with the place. The Willis Tower name was legally correct, appearing on all official documents and signage. The Sears Tower name remained culturally dominant, used by the vast majority of Chicago residents, media, and even some tenants. Tourists visiting Chicago asked locals for directions to the Sears Tower. Locals gave those directions using the same name, often without even knowing the building had been officially renamed. Some businesses operating inside the building referred to it by the old name in their materials and communications. The Willis Group's lease and naming rights were scheduled to expire in 2024, 15 years after taking effect. Whether the next major tenant would negotiate for naming rights and what name they might choose remained uncertain. But the controversy had already illustrated a fundamental truth about iconic architecture. Once a building becomes part of a city's identity, embedded in collective memory and daily language, it no longer fully belongs to its legal owners. The name changed on paper. The building did not change in the minds of the people who loved it. What the Willis Tower needed was not a new sign or a marketing campaign to convince Chicago to accept the name. What it needed was someone willing to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in comprehensive renovations to make the building functional, competitive, and relevant for the 21st century. Before Blackstone arrived with the capital and vision for a comprehensive transformation, the building received one significant upgrade that would prove enormously popular. In January 2009, the Skydeck underwent a major renovation that reimagined what an observation deck could be. The centerpiece was the ledge, a series of retractable glass boxes that would extend 4.3 feet from the building's west facade on the 103rd floor. Each box was approximately 10 feet wide, 10 feet high, and 4 feet deep. The floor, walls, and ceiling were constructed entirely of laminated glass, 1.5 inches thick, consisting of multiple layers of glass bonded together for strength. The boxes could support 5 tons of weight, far more than would ever be imposed by visitors. The boxes created the sensation of stepping out into empty air, with nothing but transparent glass between visitors and the street 1,353 feet below. The ledge opened to the public on July 2nd, 2009. The experience was exactly as terrifying and exhilarating as designers intended. Visitors stepped into the glass boxes cautiously, many on hands and knees at first, unable to trust that the transparent floor would hold them. Looking straight down revealed cars the size of ants, pedestrians like moving dots, the street grid spreading away in all directions. Some visitors lay flat on the glass to maximize the sensation. Others refused to enter at all, content to photograph friends and family who were braver or more foolish. Visitation to the Skydeck spiked immediately after the ledge opened. The attraction became one of Chicago's most popular tourist destinations, frequently mentioned in the same breath as Millennium Park, Navy Pier, and the Art Institute. Visitors came specifically for the ledge, sharing photos on social media that generated millions of impressions and drove more tourism. In May 2014, an incident occurred that generated international headlines and briefly called the ledge's safety into question. The protective coating on one of the glass boxes cracked while visitors were standing inside. Tourists heard a sharp sound and saw cracks spreading across the floor beneath their feet in a spiderweb pattern. They jumped out of the box immediately and alerted Skydeck employees. News reports described the incident as, quote, 14, quote, sparking fears about structural safety and whether visitors had been in real danger. Building officials in the engineering firm that designed the ledge moved quickly to clarify what had actually happened. The glass itself had not cracked. The ledge was designed with a protective coating applied over the structural laminated glass. The coating served to prevent scratches from shoes, dropped objects, and general wear. The coating was designed to crack under stress as a sacrificial layer, protecting the underlying structural glass from damage. When the coating cracked, it looked and sounded dramatic, but the structural integrity of the ledge was never compromised. The visitors had never been in danger. The cracked coating was replaced, and the ledge reopened within days. The same box's protective coating cracked again in June 2019 during another busy tourist period. Again, visitors were startled, but completely safe. The incidents demonstrated that the ledge was functioning exactly as designed, with the sacrificial coating absorbing stress and protecting the structural elements. In May 2022, building owners added a fifth glass ledge to the west facade, expanding capacity and reducing wait times during peak tourist seasons. The ledge had proven popular enough to justify the investment in additional boxes. The success of the ledge renovation set the stage for the much larger transformation to come. March 2015. Blackstone Group paid $1.3 billion for the Willis Tower, executing one of the largest real estate transactions in Chicago history. The price was the highest ever paid for a property in the United States outside of New York City at that time, a record that reflected both the building's iconic status and Blackstone's confidence that it could unlock value previous owners had failed to realize. Blackstone is one of the world's largest real estate investors, managing a global portfolio of office buildings, hotels, residential properties, and other assets worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The firm built its reputation on identifying underperforming assets, investing capital to reposition them, and operating them profitably. The Willis Tower fit that model perfectly. The building was famous, structurally sound, and located in a prime downtown location. But it was also dated, poorly managed, and losing tenants to newer competitors. Blackstone saw potential where others saw problems. In 2017, Blackstone announced a comprehensive renovation budget at $500 to $670 million, making it the largest capital investment in the building's 44-year history. The project was described as a street-to-sky re-envisioning, touching every aspect of the building from the ground-level plaza to the mechanical systems on the roof. Blackstone hired a team of architects and designers to execute the vision. Gensler served as the lead architect, working with SKB Architects on specific elements and OLIN on landscape and public space design. The goal was to transform the Willis Tower from a single-use office building struggling with high vacancy into a modern mixed-use destination that would attract office tenants, tourists, and local workers simultaneously. Work proceeded in phases over 5 years and was substantially complete by 2022. The renovation included the Catalog, a 6-story retail and dining complex named in direct tribute to the Sears catalog that had made the company famous. The name was both nostalgic and ironic. Leveled down into 3 basement levels, previously used only for mechanical systems and storage. The design featured a curved skylight with 240 individual glass panes that flooded the lower levels with natural light. The northern section of the roof was supported by black columns that deliberately echoed the bundled tube design of the original tower, creating visual continuity between old and new. Restaurants and food vendors filled the catalog, transforming the ground level from a dead zone into an active gathering space. Tenants included Do Right Donuts, a local favorite known for craft donuts. Sweetgreen brought its fast-casual salad concept. Sushi-san offered Japanese cuisine. Tortazo, a Mexican restaurant created by celebrity chef Rick Bayless, added another culinary option. Kindling, a sit-down restaurant with a full bar, opened later. An urban space food hall provided additional variety with multiple vendors under one roof. The 3rd floor of the catalog housed a 30,000-square-foot co-working space operated by Convene, a company specializing in flexible meeting and event spaces. The combination of dining, retail, and co-working was designed strategically to create multiple revenue streams and activate the building throughout the day. Tourists visiting the Skydeck could eat at the catalog before or after their visit. Office workers from the Willis Tower and neighboring buildings could grab lunch or meet clients. Local residents could visit for dinner. The goal was to make the ground level feel open and welcoming instead of fortress-like and exclusive. Elevator modernization represented one of the most critical and expensive components of the renovation. The original elevators installed during construction in the 1970s had never been comprehensively replaced. By the 2010s, they were failing regularly. Wait times during morning and evening rush hours reached 5 to 6 minutes, with frustrated tenants crowding the lobbies and elevator banks. The outdated system frustrated current tenants and became a significant obstacle to leasing vacant space. No company wanted to commit to a long-term lease in a building where employees spent half an hour per week just waiting for elevators. Otis Elevator Company won the contract to install more than 100 new elevator cabs throughout the building. The new system included destination dispatch technology, which fundamentally changed how people use the elevators. Instead of entering an elevator and pressing a button for their floor, riders selected their destination on a keypad in the lobby before entering an elevator. A computer algorithm assigned them to a specific elevator going to their floor, grouping passengers by destination to minimize stops. The system reduced both wait times and ride times significantly, improving the experience for tenants and visitors. Other improvements touched every building system. Blackstone installed comprehensive building automation systems that monitored and controlled HVAC, lighting, and other functions from a central platform. High-efficiency LED lighting with occupancy sensors and daylight harvesting replaced older fixtures throughout the building. The HVAC system was modernized with more efficient equipment and improved controls that could adjust temperature and ventilation floor by floor, instead of treating the entire building as one zone. Plumbing systems were upgraded to reduce water consumption and improve reliability. A rooftop green space was created, providing outdoor amenity space for tenants and helping manage stormwater runoff. Art installations were commissioned to activate public spaces and create visual interest. Jacob Hashimoto created, quote, 1/6, quote, a large-scale installation in the lobby featuring thousands of small geometric forms suspended to create a cloud-like sculpture. Olafur Eliasson designed, quote, 1/7, quote, for the exterior, a dynamic installation that changed appearance based on viewing angle and lighting conditions. The building's base cladding was redesigned to incorporate dark aluminum panels that reference the tower above while adding terracotta details as a deliberate nod to Chicago's architectural tradition of using terracotta in significant buildings. The combination of traditional material references and modern design language aimed to root the renovation in Chicago's architectural identity. By 2016, midway through the renovation process, the building had already reduced its electricity consumption by 34% through efficiency improvements and operational changes. The reduction cut operating costs and supported marketing the building as environmentally responsible. Blackstone was making an enormous bet. The firm was spending more than $500 million transforming a building based on the assumption that companies would continue to need large downtown office spaces, that Chicago's economy would remain strong, and that the Willis Tower could compete successfully with newer office towers for premium tenants. The renovation would make the building modern, efficient, and amenity-rich. Whether those improvements would be enough to fill vacant floors and generate returns that justified the investment would depend on market conditions that no one could fully predict. By 2022, the transformation was complete. The Willis Tower had been comprehensively modernized. The elevators worked. The catalog bustled with activity. The building gleamed. Then the pandemic arrived and raised fundamental questions about whether downtown offices would remain relevant at all. 20 years after 9/11 had shaken the tower and devastated its tenant roster, another crisis struck with completely different characteristics. This one did not come from terrorists wielding hijacked airplanes. It came from a virus that would fundamentally alter how Americans thought about work, offices, and the necessity of gathering in physical spaces. The COVID-19 pandemic reached the United States in early 2020. By March, cities across the country, including Chicago, issued stay-at-home orders designed to slow the virus's spread. Offices closed overnight. Workers began operating remotely from home, using laptops, video conferencing software, and cloud-based collaboration tools. What was intended as a temporary emergency measure lasting weeks became an extended experiment in remote work lasting months and then years. Companies discovered something that challenged decades of assumptions about workplace productivity. For many types of work, productivity did not collapse when employees worked from home. In some cases, productivity increased. Meetings could be conducted via Zoom or Microsoft Teams as effectively as in conference rooms. Documents could be shared through Google Drive or Dropbox as easily as through file cabinets. Project management tools like Slack and Asana replaced hallway conversations and status meetings. For knowledge workers whose jobs involved thinking, writing, analyzing, and communicating rather than physical production, the office suddenly seemed optional rather than essential. The realization had immediate and severe consequences for commercial real estate. Demand for office space plummeted across the country. Vacancy rates in downtown Chicago reached levels unseen since the recession of 2008. Companies that had previously leased entire floors began downsizing their footprints. Some companies abandoned their downtown offices entirely, deciding that remote work would become permanent policy. The cost savings from eliminating rent were substantial. The flexibility offered to employees was popular. The pandemic was forcing a reckoning. The Willis Tower faced the impact directly and visibly. United Airlines, the building's largest tenant occupying 850,000 square feet across 16 floors, cut almost 20% of its space. The airline had laid off thousands of employees during the pandemic as air travel collapsed. Flight operations that had required 2,800 employees could be managed with fewer people and less space. United exercised contractual options to reduce its footprint, giving back approximately 150,000 square feet. Other major tenants faced lease renewal decisions with profound uncertainty about the future. Willis Group Holdings, the insurance brokerage whose name was on the building, had options to contract its space. Seyfarth Shaw, a major law firm, could reduce its footprint or terminate its lease. Denton's, another law firm, had similar options. IMC, a trading firm, could walk away. Combined, these tenants controlled more than 500,000 square feet. If all of them exercised their contraction or termination options simultaneously, the building could lose nearly 1 million square feet of occupied space, driving vacancy back above 20%. In May 2020, adding to the sense that everything was going wrong simultaneously, heavy rains caused flooding in the building's 3 basement levels. Water overwhelmed drainage systems and poured into mechanical rooms. Flooding was resolved within days, but the tower's antennas went off the air temporarily as backup systems kicked in. The flooding was resolved within days, but the incident underscored the building's vulnerability and the constant maintenance challenges inherent in operating a 50-year-old structure. The flooding was minor compared to the existential crisis facing the building and every other downtown office tower. Blackstone had spent more than $500 million renovating the Willis Tower based on a fundamental assumption that companies would continue to need large office spaces in central business districts where employees could collaborate, where corporate culture could be maintained, where clients could be entertained and deals could be closed. The pandemic called that assumption into question and forced everyone to confront uncomfortable possibilities. If workers could be productive at home, why pay for expensive downtown offices? If meetings could happen effectively over video, why maintain conference rooms and collaborative spaces? If corporate culture could be sustained through virtual interactions, why gather employees in one physical location? If clients were comfortable with video calls, why maintain prestigious addresses to impress visitors? The questions had no clear answers in 2020 or 2021. Some companies committed to returning to offices as soon as public health conditions allowed, believing that in-person interaction was essential for innovation, training, culture, and productivity. Others embraced permanent remote work, eliminating offices entirely and hiring employees who could work from anywhere. Most companies adopted hybrid models as a compromise, allowing employees to split time between home and office. The hybrid model reduced the amount of space each company needed. If employees came to the office only 2 or 3 days per week, companies could provide fewer desks through hoteling systems where workers reserved space as needed. A company that previously needed 50,000 square feet for 200 employees might need only 30,000 square feet under a hybrid model. The math was brutal for landlords. Reduced space requirements multiplied across hundreds of tenants meant millions of square feet of excess capacity in downtown office markets. According to Telos Group, a commercial real estate brokerage, the Willis Tower maintained approximately 95% occupancy through the pandemic and into 2021. That figure seemed reassuring but was potentially misleading. Occupancy reflected signed leases, not actual daily usage. A tenant might be counted as occupying 50,000 square feet, while employees actually used only half that space on any given day because of hybrid schedules. The future remained deeply uncertain. Lease renewals scheduled for 2023 and 2024 would reveal whether tenants remained committed to their current space or sought to downsize significantly. If multiple major tenants reduced their footprint simultaneously, the building could face a vacancy crisis worse than anything seen after 9/11. The pandemic presented a fundamentally different challenge than the terrorist attacks. After 9/11, the question was whether tenants felt safe in tall buildings. Fear was the obstacle. The problem was psychological and emotional. Over time, fear faded as security improved and the immediate threat receded. The pandemic raised a more fundamental question about whether tall office buildings served a necessary function in an economy where knowledge work could be performed anywhere. If remote work proved viable and popular long-term, demand for office space could decline permanently. Blackstone's massive investment depended on the building remaining relevant and necessary. The renovation had made the Willis Tower modern, efficient, and amenity-rich. The elevators worked smoothly. The catalog attracted foot traffic. The building looked spectacular. Whether modernity and amenities mattered if companies fundamentally no longer needed offices remained to be seen. No one had answers in 2022. It took the Sears Tower close to a decade to fully recover from the devastating impact of 9/11. 20 years later, The Willis Tower faced an entirely different crisis that raised equally unnerving questions about what lay ahead for the building and for downtown office markets everywhere. Today, the Willis Tower stands at 95% occupancy, according to the most recent figures from building management and brokerage firms tracking the property. United Airlines remains the largest tenant despite its pandemic-era contraction, occupying 850,000 square feet across 16 floors. Other major tenants include Willis Towers Watson, the insurance brokerage whose name appears on the building. Arent Fox Schiff, a law firm, leases multiple floors. Seyfarth Shaw, another law firm with a long history in the building, maintains its presence. Morgan Stanley, the investment bank, occupies space for its Chicago operations. Approximately 10,000 people enter the building each day for work, though that number fluctuates based on hybrid work schedules that allow many employees to work from home several days per week. The Skydeck attracts between 1.3 and 1.7 million visitors annually, making it consistently one of the most popular tourist attractions in Chicago. The observation deck operates 365 days per year, closing only during the most severe weather when high winds make the upper floors unsafe. Tourists from across the United States and around the world include the Skydeck on their Chicago itineraries, often spending an hour or more on the 103rd floor, experiencing the ledge, taking photographs, and viewing the city from 1,353 feet above the streets. The building has lost the height records it once held, and that once defined its identity. In 1998, the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, surpassed the Willis Tower to become the world's tallest buildings by architectural height. The Willis Tower had held the title of world's tallest for 25 years, from 1973 to 1998. In 2013, One World Trade Center in New York became the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, surpassing the Willis Tower after it had held that distinction for 40 years. The symbolic importance of losing the Western Hemisphere title to the replacement for the buildings destroyed on September 11th was not lost on anyone. As of 2025, the Willis Tower ranks as the 26th tallest building in the world and the third tallest in the United States behind One World Trade Center and Central Park Tower, both in New York. The height rankings matter less than they once did. What matters more is the architectural legacy that extends far beyond the building itself. Fazlur Rahman Khan died on March 27, 1982, at the age of 53. He suffered a heart attack while traveling and did not live to see how completely his bundled tube innovation transformed global architecture and made buildings twice the height of the Sears Tower structurally and economically feasible. The structural system Khan developed for the Sears Tower became the foundation for modern, super-tall construction worldwide. The Burj Khalifa in Dubai, currently the world's tallest building at over 2,600 feet, uses a modified bundled tube concept adapted for even greater heights. Most skyscrapers constructed in the past 4 decades employ variations of Khan's structural principles. The efficiency of the bundled tube allowed buildings to rise higher, while using less material than previous structural systems required. The design freedom it provided enabled architects to create varied shapes and distinctive silhouettes instead of the uniform rectangular towers that dominated skylines before Khan's innovations. Khan's work opened economic possibilities by creating vast amounts of premium real estate on minimal land footprints, making super-tall buildings financially viable in dense urban centers around the world. A bronze sculpture honoring Khan stands in the Willis Tower lobby, commissioned by the Structural Engineers Association of Illinois. The memorial acknowledges a man who earned titles, including the father of tubular designs, the Einstein of structural engineering, and the greatest structural engineer of the 20th century. Khan died young. The bundled tube system lives on. The building's cultural significance extends well beyond its engineering achievements. The Willis Tower remains deeply embedded in Chicago's identity and daily life. Most Chicago residents still call it the Sears Tower, nearly 16 years after the official name change to Willis Tower. The persistence of the old name reflects civic attachment that runs deeper than corporate branding or legal documents. When Chicagoans give directions, they reference the Sears Tower. When tourists ask for recommendations, locals tell them to visit the Sears Tower. The name persists in conversation, in mental maps of the city, in collective memory. Tourists visiting Chicago photograph the building from every angle and every distance. It appears in films and television shows set in the city, from action movies to romantic comedies to crime dramas. Architecture students study its design in universities on every continent. The Chicago Architecture Center features the tower prominently in its boat tours, walking tours, and educational programs explaining the bundled tube system and Khan's innovations to hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. Since 2009, the building has hosted Skyrise Chicago, an annual charity event where participants climb the 103-story staircase to raise money for the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, a rehabilitation hospital. The event attracts hundreds of climbers each year who train for months to prepare for ascending 2,109 steps from the ground floor to the Skydeck. The building has also been the site of unauthorized climbs that captured international attention. On May 25, 1981, Dan Goodwin, dressed as Spider-Man, climbed the exterior of the tower using suction cups and other climbing tools. The Chicago Fire Department attempted to stop him by spraying him with fire hoses, arguing that his climb was dangerous and illegal. Goodwin persisted, reaching the top after 7 hours. He was arrested for trespassing immediately upon stepping off the roof. In August 1999, Alain Robert, known internationally as the French Spider-Man, climbed the building using only his bare hands and feet, with no safety equipment. A thick fog settled in during the last 20 stories, making the glass and steel exterior slippery and dangerous. Robert completed the climb without injury. Unlike Goodwin, he was not arrested, possibly because by 1999, such climbs had become part of his international reputation, and authorities chose not to give him the publicity that arrest would generate. The Willis Tower is no longer the tallest building in the world, or even in the United States. It may no longer be essential to Chicago's economy in the way it was when Sears employed thousands there, but it stands as a monument to what happens when ambition meets engineering, when corporate power builds something that outlasts the corporation itself. The tower Sears built outlived Sears as a tenant. The tower Khan designed outlived Khan himself. The bundled tube system that seemed radical and experimental in 1970 became conventional wisdom by 2000. Adopted by engineers worldwide as the standard approach to super-tall construction. Innovation that appears revolutionary when introduced becomes infrastructure that everyone takes for granted. Buildings that define their era eventually become relics of it. The tower no longer proclaims Sears' dominance of American retail. Sears filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in 2018, a century and 26 years after its founding. The company that once employed 350,000 people now operates fewer than a dozen stores. Hoffman Estates, the Chicago suburb that offered $240 million in incentives to lure Sears away from the tower, demolished the corporate campus in 2024 after Sears abandoned it during the bankruptcy. The incentives, the largest package ever offered to a company in Illinois, produced 29 years of employment before Sears left the suburb just as it had left the tower. The tower remains standing. It houses offices. Tourists visit the ledge and photograph the city below. Elevators rise and fall. The building performs its function without drama or glory, generating revenue for Blackstone and rent receipts for tenants. That is what survival looks like for architecture. Not triumph, but persistence. Not dominance, but usefulness. Not forever, but long enough. Corporate monuments are built to proclaim permanence. Sears, Roebuck Company spent $175 million constructing the world's tallest building to demonstrate that the company would dominate American retail forever. Forever lasted 21 years. The tower opened in 1973. Sears abandoned it in 1994. The company that could not imagine a future without continuous expansion, could not imagine a future where it would fail, where competitors would surpass it, where the catalog would close and stores would shutter and bankruptcy would come. Failure came anyway. Kmart surpassed Sears. Walmart surpassed both. Amazon redefined retail in ways that made physical stores seem obsolete. The catalog that had defined American shopping for a century was discontinued in 1993. The retail empire collapsed slowly and then suddenly. The tower stood, Fazlur Rahman Khan built a structural system so efficient and elegant it revolutionized skyscraper construction worldwide and enabled buildings that reached heights he never imagined. He died at 53, never seeing the Burj Khalifa or the hundreds of other towers that would employ variations of his bundled tube concept. His innovation outlived him by decades and will outlive everyone reading this. Engineering genius transcends its creator. Khan is gone. The bundled tube remains, embedded in buildings on every continent. Chicago still calls the building the Sears Tower, despite 15 years of legal documents saying otherwise. The name persists because the public refuses to let corporations dictate memory and identity. Buildings become part of a city's fabric, woven into daily language and mental geography. Once embedded, they belong to everyone who lives there, not just to whoever holds the deed. The Willis Group leased 3 floors and bought naming rights. Chicagoans ignored the new signs. Tourists visit the Skydeck at 1,353 feet above the street. They step onto the ledge and look down through laminated glass at the city below, experiencing the terror and exhilaration of seeming to float in midair. They photograph the view and post images on social media with captions that say, Sears Tower, because that is what the building is called in collective memory, regardless of what lawyers and contracts say. The building operates today much as it did 50 years ago. Elevators carry workers to offices in the morning and home in the evening. Tenants pay rent monthly. Building systems require constant maintenance and occasional replacement. Revenue flows to the owners who pay operating costs and mortgage debt and extract whatever profit remains. The tower has survived Sears' departure in the 1990s, 9/11's terror in 2001, the financial crisis in 2008, the pandemic's disruption in 2020. It survives because it remains useful. Office buildings that cease being useful get demolished, their materials salvaged or discarded, their sites redeveloped. The Willis Tower remains useful enough to justify its continued existence, though the margin has narrowed and the future is less certain than it once seemed. What the tower represents has changed fundamentally over 5 decades. In 1973, it symbolized corporate invincibility, the confidence of a company so dominant it could build the world's tallest building. In 2025, it symbolizes corporate mortality, the reality that even giants fall, that success is temporary, that monuments outlast the empires that built them. The world's largest retailer built the world's tallest building and abandoned it 2 decades later. The lesson is not subtle. Empires fall, monuments endure. What survives is not the company or the executives or the vision of eternal dominance. What survives is the steel frame, the glass facade, the bundled tubes carrying weight down through the structure to bedrock. If you visit Chicago, the Willis Tower is located at 233 South Wacker Drive in the Loop, occupying the entire block bounded by Franklin, Jackson, Wacker, and Adams. The Skydeck is open every day of the year. Elevators ascend 103 floors in approximately 60 seconds. On clear days, visibility extends 50 miles. You can see across Illinois into Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin, watching the curvature of the earth emerge at the horizon. You can step onto the ledge and experience the sensation of standing in midair 1,353 feet above the city, looking straight down at streets and buildings that define one of America's great urban centers. Millions of people make this trip every year. They come to see what Sears built and what Khan engineered. They come to stand where the tallest building in the world once rose and where the 3rd tallest building in the United States still stands. They come because the tower, despite everything that has happened, despite all the companies and owners and crises that have come and gone, endures. The monument outlasted the empire. The innovation outlasted the innovator. The building outlasted its original purpose. That is the story of the Sears Tower. Not triumph, but survival. Not glory, but persistence. Not forever, but long enough to become something greater than what it was built to be. A testament to human ambition and engineering genius that transcends the corporate mortality that brought it into being.